welcome to our next instalment of our series, Foundations of Faith. This week I'm going to talk to you about commitment and community. One of the things I've heard people say over the years is, I can be a Christian without coming to church. Whilst yes, of course, this is true that you can believe in Jesus without rooting yourself in a fellowship, if you're not part of a wider community, the question exists as to whether in doing so you are following Christ's example and living out your faith. When I look at how Jesus lived, whilst he took time to withdraw in prayer and be alone with his Father, there is seldom a time anywhere in the Gospels where he was otherwise alone. Even from an early age, when he went to Jerusalem, he spent time debating the scriptures with others in the temple. One can imagine that when he wasn't at home helping his mother, he was working with Joseph, learning his trade as a carpenter. Once he was in ministry, he was surrounded by the disciples, and before long he was with crowds of people regularly. His example shows me that being with others is important. Sharing your faith walk with others is important. And being ready to respond to the needs of those around you is important. Romans 12 talks of how we are each part of one body, and a single member of the body cannot exist in isolation. It is in fact God's plan that we should not be alone, and to live in community with one another. But actually, what is living in community with one another? The Apostle Paul describes this through his various writings as several things: generosity, humility, unity, which extends to hospitality and inclusivity, forgiveness, accountability, and brotherly love. We'll look at each in turn. So firstly, generosity. Acts 2 tells us of how everyone gave where there was need, so that they were all equal. There was no hoarding of possessions and looking after solely themselves, but looking after each other. In the culture we live in today, there is a mantra of looking out for number one, a goal of self-sufficiency and needing nothing from others. While some people may thrive as a result, many more are left out and feel like they have failed if they can't provide for themselves and their family. I think it's safe to say that more people are damaged by this part of our culture than are helped by it. In the Bible, there are examples of generosity that sometimes feel so out of reach because we are so used to such radically different behaviour. In cases such as these, we can easily shut ourselves off to the call to change as it simply feels too much. So how do we make this relevant to us in a way that we can make a step towards generosity in a godly way? If we look at other cultures across the world, in nations considered developing by Western standards, there is a culture of togetherness. If someone needs a particular item, say a large cooking pot, then it wouldn't matter who in the community had it. Anyone who needed it could use it and would share it freely. In contrast, if the same situation were to occur in our culture, we would assume that every individual who needs such an item would go out and buy one for themselves. We end up spending our resources on an item which is then rarely used, takes up space, and can easily become a point of contention as it's always in the way. We end up having spent more than we should have, end up with more stuff than we need, and have often not benefited those around us in any way in doing so. How much better it is in the culture where it is shared by all who need it. The item itself can then become a point of joy and blessing rather than contention. Unnecessary expense and waste are never in the way as a result. I wonder how we can incorporate more open generosity in our own community. The second point we're going to look at is empathy. It says in Romans, we are called to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice, to bear one another's burdens in Galatians, and to have compassionate hearts in Colossians. Part of loving people well is walking alongside them even when hard times come, praying with them and providing support. It also means that we seek to understand others' points of view. I remember hearing the phrase, if you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, then you'll understand them. The problem with loving people is people aren't always easy to love. We annoy one another, don't understand one another, and are not always available when we want them to be at a time that is convenient to us. However, Jesus clearly said that people will know that we are his disciples by the way that we love one another. It is because people are not always easy to love that it makes us stand out when we choose to love them anyway. They don't have to be, and probably shouldn't be, lavish displays of affection. Rather, this is the demonstration of commitment to others. To be there for them even if they mistreat us. To support them when they need it. To say a kind word even if they might not deserve it. We are called to build up, to edify one another, and not to tear each other down. The third point is humility. The familiar saying, pride comes before a fall, is sadly so often true. We are none of us perfect, and Jesus instructs us not to think so highly of ourselves so that we cannot see our own failings. It is easy to see the failings in others, but Jesus tells us that we are not called to judge. Only God will judge. Therefore, it is of utmost importance to allow Him to hold up a mirror to us on a regular basis so we can truly see our actions, behaviours and attitudes for what they are. The closer you draw to Jesus, the more He helps you to see how unworthy we are of His love. In turn, this causes us to worship Him more deeply as we see how wonderfully true and ultimately incredible it is when He says that He will exchange our ashes for His beautiful adornments. We can only truly be part of community together when we realise that none of us deserve to be part of God's family. Yet, the thing that we share with one another is the redemption from our brokenness, which binds us together. So the fourth point is unity. Unity commands a blessing. 1 Corinthians says, I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same judgment. We are called to live in harmony with one another, and, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Living in unity would be easy if everyone agreed to the same things. However, we don't always see eye to eye on everything that comes up. However, instead of choosing to allow differences to divide us, we need to realise that we often have more in common with one another than we have differences between us. If we have a disagreement, deal with it in the correct manner and allow all to move forward. Fifth point is forgiveness. We know that forgiveness is core to the Christian faith, but in terms of community, it doesn't always mean forgiving those who don't know Jesus. Often it's about forgiving those who do, who in our own mind, perhaps we consider that they should know better. Sometimes that's harder. Colossians 3 tells us that if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, and so you also must forgive. Forgiveness isn't always, if ever, easy, but in order to remain united, it is absolutely essential. Sixth point is accountability. Accountability is not just about giving or receiving correction where it is needed. It is about having people around you to support you, guide you, and stand by you. We should always seek godly counsel and support one another through life's daily trials, as well as being there for the big moments. Regular connection with other believers helps you to maintain an open dialogue as to what life looks like for each of us each time we meet, and gives us opportunity to encourage one another as to how to respond to the trials and situations we are faced with. With this also comes the opportunity for others to share their own experience and sometimes to help us see the bigger picture. Galatians 6 says, Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual, in other words, those who also confess to follow Jesus, should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. If we have accountability with one another, if we are falling away from the straight and narrow path even slightly, those with whom we surround ourselves have the opportunity to help us get back on track before we stray too far. And the final point is brotherly love. Above all things, we are to love one another. Colossians 3 says, Above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Even with all the other things in place, if we do not have one another, it is not heartfelt and true. We can do all the right things, say or not say all the right things, and behave as we should with those around us. But if we do not have love, it is described in the Bible essentially as just noise. Hebrews 13 says, "Let brotherly love continue." So, all of these elements, these attributes of being part of a community of faith, are important in order for us to not only function well as a community, but for everyone to feel equally involved in it. We each have our part to play, but there's a lot to do there. How on earth can we ever do all of this on our own? The Bible says, thankfully, we don't have to. John 14 says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you." I think that if we follow the biblical recipe for community, the commitment to it, to one another, and ultimately to Jesus will flow easily from it. He has made us to be with one another, to support one another, to walk with one another. We are not designed to go it alone in any way, shape, or form. This does not mean filling our diaries with church events or meetings, but this does mean making space in our lives for us to share it with one another. I hope this message encourages you, and if you're not already a member of Community of Faith, please do get in touch, as we don't want anyone to miss out on the opportunity to be part of what God is doing. Take care.